Thanks very much to the organizers and to the No Bugs host for putting this conference together. I think this is just great to finally come out in public again. So I'm real happy to talk to you about the APS and about data collection. These are two of my strong points. I want to note that the APS begins its major upgrade. We've already started on pieces of it, but we go dark in April of next year for 1 year, then officially reopen for new operations. So having said that, let's move on. It's easy to remember that when you're dealing with GitHub passwords and commit histories and budgeting priorities and scheduling and figuring out how to prioritize what went wrong, what really motivates us to do our work is we're here to improve the experimental efficiency of our users. Mary gave me a great quote a couple of years ago. I try to keep this first and foremost as I'm juggling all the different project priorities, is that set up these experiments for success. This is the human engineering of our job. We be scientists, but in this aspect of our work, we're engineers. Engineers make work for humans. So in the APS upgrade, I'll give you a couple of slides on the upgrade, and then we'll venture into the blue sky as well, how that fits in. But the BEAMLINE control scope is that we're going to have a suite of state-of-the-art beamlines and instruments. The most salient property of the APS upgrade is going to be a change in the source admittance from a very broad source to a very narrow source, engaging a variety of new science. But in addition, we're going to be able to engage faster science as well. So we've divided our facility upgrades in, like the beamlines, into 3 broad categories. Facility feature beamlines are going to have the most significant parts of their upgrades where the instrument will be replaced or recited. The enhanced beamlines are those that are in that second tier that will have major parts of the instrument that are upgraded. And then the third part of the beamlines, the remainder of them will be improved as time and budget permits. But the overall scope is to provide improvements to every beamline on the floor. We're focusing on feature techniques as they advance the science that the APS can do. So the vision in the BEAMLINE controls, now let's focus a little more narrowly, is my group. I'm with the BEAMLINE controls group now. Our operability. We need to meet current and future needs. Current and future needs means data scale, data rates, hardware scanning. Needs to operate safely and reliably. Of course, we understand that for sure. But it also needs to be maintainable so that when I retire, somebody else can step in and do the things I'm doing and then do them better. We want to reduce the development and maintenance costs. So we have to choose tools that don't impose high maintenance costs. This is part of my question earlier, is how do we upgrade the staff? We need to provide tools that the staff can adopt so that they can move into those new tools and keep up with the cutting edge technologies that they demand. They just want to move to them. Adaptability, the toolkit design approach. So we have layers of interfaces to provide new software at each of the levels that we choose. A key point of the APS future, and this is outlined previously in the talk, is what we're going to call fly scanning. These are hardware assisted scans, usually at rates that are faster than you can expect out of Python software. So these are very much controlled by hardware and FPGA or some other closed loop control system. And be interfaceable with data management, workflow tools, so we can take advantage of new cutting edge technologies in those areas. The plan for beamlines, as I mentioned before, advanced, enhanced, and base. I'm not sure I need to add to that. This provides some content. We'll skip forward. We'll save some time. So one of the ways that we're doing is the APS has been operating for a generation now, and we've come to rely on the EPICS control system that we're using and found that it is plenty good for so many things we want to do. And those things that are at fast scale, we can rely down into lower level hardware for doing that, FPGAs for timing operations. So for things that are faster than you can expect EPICS to be able to handle as a network distributed control system, we're going to go to fast controls. In recent development of EPICS, it's gone from just channel access, which provides simple information bundles that you can communicate, to structured data that can be represented en masse, so that in addition to providing an image with area detector, you can provide a variety of parameters associated with that, the shape of that image, the color depth, as well as you can embed metadata in these packages, making it much more efficient to use the system. We developed a toolkit of software for beamline controls called Synapse. And this has motor support, it has scalar support, a variety of the standard kit work that you expect to see. We're going to continue to use that, and we'll develop new components that go into it. But what's new at the APS and new amongst the US late sources in the last few years is a Python framework called Blue Sky for doing data acquisition and data collection, but it also is addressing the life cycle of data from acquisition to analysis. So the idea is you acquire data you interface with your control system with an ophyd layer, you acquire data with a Blue Sky run engine. That then has a publish subscribe model for data recipients. That could be a database, could be your on-screen visualizations, this could be a file writer. So if you want to write a spec data file, if you want to write a Nexus HDF5 file, you can attach a subscriber to that. But the idea is that we work on a collaborative basis with tools that our staff can use. And we also have a gradual deployment dictated at several of the beamlines. We've already started to roll this out in advance of the APS upgrade. You see a variety of different beamlines. Tomography is a 2BMD mono project. We're working with typography, some diffraction, 4ID polar, with polarization and diffraction. Also at 6IDB, XPCS at 8. And let me point out that we have two facilities on here that aren't beamlines. We have a deposition laboratory where we actually deposit mirror coatings, and that's being run with Blue Sky protocols. We also are using simulated beamlines, so to work on an autonomous beamline, demonstrating with a queue, demonstrating with data flow, data management, how we can actually have an autonomous beamline. How does Blue Sky fit in? As I said before, it's for data collection. And it doesn't replace the existing control system. It has a hard interface for that so that we can rely on all the work of the rest of my group to use the EPICS layer, which is at the bottom of the diagram here. We have a variety of IOCs, which are EPICS controllers. They can talk to each other, they can talk to clients above the line. Blue Sky is in the user space, so there's that blue box there. And it's for coordinating measurements, collecting all the information from the IOCs, and then emitting it to a data server or eventually through a web server. But the idea here is it uses your control system as it is and replaces what you use to run experiments, which is pushed in the background now. IPython, Jupyter, your choice. We have only a couple of people at the APS who are working on the Blue Sky development, because we have people working on the rest of the controls for 30, 40 beamlines at least. So make a hard interface here. The graphical user interface uses some of the existing tools we've had, or if a custom user interface is necessary, the beamline is scoped with writing that themselves. And what we provide is good hard content underneath so that they can use that as libraries. Web interfaces, they're limited. Getting into using this queue server from Blue Sky so that we can actually have a queue that's operating. A user could write software to update that queue, monitor that queue. The interface is through JSON, so it's actually fairly easy to manipulate. We've tested that with an autonomous beamline at the APS, and that works really nice. Live data visualization, other procedures for adding metadata. These are all parts of the Blue Sky system. What we like the use of Python because it taps into all of the Python control, Python software universe. For example, Americans don't like to use standard SI units, so we use Pint for converting between various units. Of course, the science use metric, but you can't get two spectroscopy beamlines to agree on what units for energy. Just can't seem to do it. So it's very useful to use software to do unit conversion. Now it becomes possible as part of the control system. The controls seem to want one unit, the user picks a different one, and it's very simple. For packaging data to get offsite, because still scientists can't wrap their heads around the idea that their data is in the database. So they want it in a data file. And why do they want it in a data file? Because they can find it by name. What's the name of a data file in the directory? That's just more metadata. Those are tags you throw into the database. So we have to have strong tools for pulling the data out of the database. So let's get to the next one. From user experience, because we need to meet the users as well, users need to know you have a small support group, who can I go to for help? Obviously, we're trying to train up some of their peers so that the peers can be useful as references for educating the facility. But we want to have discussions that are out in public on Slack, on GitHub, wherever the users can find information. They want to Google it. They want to find it on Stack Overflow. They need to be able to find information that will help them solve that problem on Saturday night. We have a question and answer forum on Gitter. We publish all of our instrument configurations that are allowed on GitHub. If there's anything proprietary or something they don't want to leak out, we have an inside the lab GitLab server for that. We have weekly teleconferences with the other Blue Sky users. We have meetings with the instrument teams. We have weekly office hours where anybody can walk in with a problem. Those are held online so that people can walk in virtually. These are all methods that we do to try to engage the users into the upgrade. Data representation. Part of this is there's a goal at the RI Medical Lab of easily discoverable data repositories. The data you collect at your facility should be able to be found, permissions granted, later on. Up until recently, data files are stored in the directory pattern that's used by the local instrument, but known by precious few others. And we want to fix that. Raw data is stored as a sequence of timestamp events in Blue Sky. So this leads for time-based data collection, synchronization of asynchronous data streams. So that's a good advance from Blue Sky. They're saved in a Mongo database. We're going to take the ideas of using a Redis buffer in between for optimizing even faster write speeds. We're doing facility managed Mongo databases. Large data stored by reference, not by file, or not by content. So the image, area detector images are always stored in HDF5 files or TIFF files, however they're stored. We store a reference in the Mongo, as well as a method for extracting that data. We'll keep an eye on the performance of these servers centrally so that the beamlines don't have to become IT staff themselves. Data representation, we're using this databroker for abstracting the database that's behind it. So at one point, we might be able to replace MongoDB with some other type of data system. We'd like to make that transparent to the users of the Blue Sky system. Measurements are usually recorded as a run or a measurement, as people know. Retrieval can be done as an X-ray data set or a pandas data frame through the Python interface, or there's a JSON interface to recall through another software called Tile. A key point in this entire system is the introduction of broad use of metadata to describe information. Obviously, some people like to put a full abstract of their sample in the file name. We'd like to get away from that sort of idea because there's no unique way to do that. No common way to do that. So this is one of the motivators to go to a database system. But what's going to be important for the benefit of AI and ML processes, you have to be consistent about how you name things, because then you can apply AI and ML processes. We've started to do that on some of the beamlines for automatic alignment or for next measurement capabilities. You need to be able to search so that you can find all the scans you ran last Tuesday, for example, or scans that involved me as a collaborator. And so those are common searches that people want to do. Get a little bit into the Blue Sky, but I'm not really going to show you any of the Python guts of this. Measurements controlled by a run engine. They're run as plans. A plan is simply a Python generator function. And this is probably the most difficult thing that people see with Blue Sky is learning to use yield or yield from in their coding rather than just directly executing a command in Python. But having done that, we use databroker as a subscriber, and users can construct their own plans so they can take the scan that does a simple theta 2 theta scan, for example, and they can wrap it inside another plan which repeats the scan every 5 minutes, or ramps the temperature controller, waits for it to stabilize, and runs the scan again, whatever the parameters are. And you can stack these things like an onion. Devices or signals can be scanned, so that's going to be a major upgrade from many of the spec beamlines that we've been running, so that we can scan anything. Readables are detectors, any kind of readable. And I'm hearing you. Yeah, good. Fly scanning, as I said, and we've got some experience doing fly scanning. A fly scan is actually a hardware-assisted scan. Nothing more than that. You could do, we did fly scanning years ago with the chart recorder, analog detector. That's a fly scan. But now we're talking about higher speed scans, a lot of data coming in. APS has a model called taxi fly. Taxi is the preparation phase. Before you start the fly scan, you taxi out to the end of the runway, you do all your prep, then you start to operate, and eventually the plane leaves the ground. That's when you start your data collection for a fly scan. But that's when the beginning of the fly scan is. So as an example, USACs, ultra small angle X-ray scattering, divided up into slow scanning across the peak, fast scanning out in the background, covering a large angular space, going small steps at very low Q dot, large steps at high Q. Here's an example of a fly scan. Nice continuous scan through that profile. Obviously, it's a 1D type of scan, but it needs to be done sequentially. So there we go. We have a lot of different contours, a lot of geometries of different contours. This is where spec has been powerful. So we need to be able to replicate these in the new Python code. We're working with code that comes from Soleil for this and gaining experience on that. Where to get more information? We have a bunch of things online, just like everybody needs to be. You have to be online and findable. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone on my team. Stand on the shoulders of giants. Questions?